Hello everyone, and welcome to the predicted 2024 Clemson football record. We're going to go through the schedule and round to the nearest quarter the probabilities that Clemson is going to win each of the games on their schedule, and then at the end we'll add them all up to see the total record that it spits out. So, Clemson to me is a very interesting team. This is the first non-SEC or Big Ten team that we're doing in this series, but certainly not the last. It's no secret that Clemson has fallen off quite a bit offensively from the mid to late 2010s with Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson and the skill guys that they had at the time. Guys like Travis Etienne, Justin Ross, the list goes on. Clemson has fallen off since then offensively, and they haven't really gotten back to where they need to be. They hired Garrett Riley last year. Last year things didn't really take off. But with guys getting more experience like Antonio Williams, Phil Maffa, Jake Brenningstool, and with the addition of the superstar freshman receiver Brian Wesco, it should be an interesting thing to see how Clemson does offensively in 2024. And with that last player, the freshman wide receiver, it's kind of interesting because as an Auburn fan, we talk about Cam Coleman, what's he going to do this year as a really superstar freshman receiver. Clemson's kind of in the same boat where they've got a really good freshman receiver and they want to see him play immediately because they think he can just be that good. So, going into the schedule, Clemson plays their first game in Atlanta against Georgia. Georgia is clearly the more talented team, and this is a criticism against Dabo Swinney that a lot of people, myself included, have levied against him, is that he doesn't really use the portal to gain players. Now, obviously, they don't lose a lot of players through the portal like other teams do. And I do think that there is something to be said about the rock-solid cultural foundation that Clemson has that other schools really don't. At the same time, though, they're missing out on very talented guys that they not only that they could have, but that their opponents would not get if they had them. You know, Georgia's the most talented team in the country. It's not exactly a slight on Clemson to say that they're an inferior team. I'm really interested to see how Clemson does on the lines of scrimmage. Defensive line is really one of the areas where they haven't dropped off that much since their championship winning days. And the offensive line is experienced enough that they should, in theory, take a next step this year. But in general, does the offense as a whole take a next step this year? Klubnik has a lot to prove from his high ranking coming out of high school, and so we'll see if he's the quarterback that they thought he was out of high school. But the Georgia game is in all likelihood a loss. It's just a matter of, do they keep it close, or are they completely destroyed by Georgia? And that also has a lot to do with how good Georgia is this year. Are they really, really good, or are they going to be in a lot more close games than people think this year? Still, I give Clemson a chance in this game, but I don't give them a very large chance to win this game. Appalachian State is next for Clemson, and it reminds me of 2016. Clemson had just played at Auburn the week before. It was a very big emotional game, a very tough game, a very demanding game. And they come back, and they almost lose to Troy the next week at home. I could see a very similar thing happening this time where Appalachian State keeps it close just because that's how they profile as a group of 5 team anyway. They've upset some teams before that they weren't supposed to. Obviously, Michigan in 2007 when they were still FCS, and then Texas A&M a couple years ago. This kind of thing, Clemson is not immune to. Even if Clemson is good this year, they're not immune to a potential close game or potential upset from Appalachian State. And we saw what happened even last year with Oklahoma State, where Oklahoma State was a good team, and they got destroyed, got blown out by South Alabama at home. Those Sun Belt teams are not to be messed with, especially the upper tier. Appalachian State is absolutely capable of that. And so, I will not consider an App State game pretty much at all to be a 1. It's a .75. Clemson then has a bye and then plays NC State at home, which is a game I have as a .5. NC State, obviously a very good team, but what's interesting is the dynamic that both of these teams by this point could have an SEC loss. I guess you could also say they could both have an SEC win, or one has a win and one has a loss. But it's very interesting because what's most likely in all of that scenario is that both of them have a loss to a upper tier SEC team, because NC State plays Tennessee in week 2. And then they play an inferior opponent, so they don't have the bye, but Clemson does. And so both of these teams could be just worn out by this game. Like already, that early in the season, just from, having the loss and then having to play this game, which is a rivalry. And both of these teams also are young on defense. I really wonder what kind of game this is going to be. And which young defense steps up, obviously. I think Clemson's offensive line is going to be good, but then I think so is NC State's. I think the offensive lines are going to dominate. I could see that game actually, now that I'm talking myself into it, I could see it being a shootout either way, especially with McCall at quarterback, because we know what he is and we know that he can produce as a passer. I'm going to give this a 0.5, and I think it'd be a very interesting game to watch. Maybe slight edge Clemson due to home field, but it's not enough to change the rating, in my opinion. Clemson then plays Stanford at home, which is very weird to say as a conference game, but that's the world we live in now, where West Coast teams are playing in the Atlantic Coast Conference. I almost never give a conference game a rating of a 1, and I was very close to doing it with this one. But because I know Troy Taylor is actually quite a good coach, especially schematically, I did give this a 0.75. What concerns me for Stanford, just in general in Power 5 play, is the fact that they're a slow team. They just lack speed. They really have, and they have for a while now. And I don't think they'll be able to keep up with Clemson, but there is, the off chance that Clemson commits, 5 or 6 turnovers and Stanford's in this one. There's also the chance that Clemson just pulls a Colorado and blows a 29-point lead at halftime. I don't think that's going to happen. I've rated this a 0.75. Clemson plays their first true road game against Florida State in October. I don't know how they set up the schedule like that, but that's the way the schedule worked out. And I've rated this game a 0.5. Now, perception might be Florida State is quite a bit better than Clemson, and they might even perceive them to be quite a bit more talented than Clemson. But the entire time that Mike Norvell has been at Florida State, they have not had a better recruiting class than Clemson. Not once. And that's a really underrated fact for just how much transfers tilt things in your favor if you're a team like Florida State. They bring in a lot of transfers every year, and so you don't really notice the talent gap between Clemson and Florida State because they take a lot of other teams' talented players in the portal every year, and Clemson doesn't due to their philosophy. And so it feels like every year it's a referendum on, well, if Clemson loses this game, it means that, Dabo's stuck in his ways and he'll never learn and blah, blah, blah. Guys, Florida State might have more of Alabama's roster from last year than Alabama does this year. Of course, I'm joking, but they do have a lot of former Alabama players when, they jump ship because Nick Saban left, obviously. Probably the biggest of these would be Roydell Williams, the running back. And I do think Florida State's offense, I don't expect it to drop off, and their defense is also very talented. So this should be a very talented matchup all around. And I haven't even really mentioned the big storyline in this game, and that's DJ Uiagalelei. The former Clemson quarterback is now the quarterback for Florida State. And I really do think they've replaced Jordan Travis with a very good quarterback. DJ Uiagalelei hasn't really played up to his 5-star potential. I think he would agree with that. But you got one more year, you've got one more shot to prove it all with a very talented team around you, a lot of guys to get the ball to show your skill set. And, if you're DJ Uiagalelei, you really want to win this one. Especially after some of the things that he's said about Dabo Swinney, I should say, since leaving. At Wake Forest the following week, was a .75. I'm not going to go in too much detail for some of these. I think we all know why at Wake is a .75. Clemson's just got the manpower, even in Winston-Salem, to take care of business. Dabo Swinney has never lost to Wake Forest, and they've played against them every year he's been there. And I know, Dave Clawson, he wins sometimes because of the slow mesh stuff. I don't know what happened last year, aside from the fact that, well, I do know what happened. They lost Sam Hartman, and that was a really good quarterback, and they didn't really have an answer beyond that. But we move on. Clemson plays Virginia at home. Tony Elliott's the head coach, former Clemson offensive coordinator, I thought was notable. Calandria's, I think, has potential. We'll just see if the offense figures things out, because it's year 3. Offense needs to figure things out for Virginia. You can't cling on to, well, we're rebuilding, because Bronco Mendenhall also had that excuse at Virginia, and he still eventually won after a couple years. Virginia really needs to prove something, but I don't know if it'll be against Clemson. I've rated it a .75. Then Clemson gets a bye. They get Louisville at home. Louisville's an interesting team on Clemson's schedule for a couple of reasons. They've got some big transfer players, Tyler Shuck at quarterback, Ja'Cory Brooks from Alabama, and then they've also got a couple of transfer quarterbacks behind Tyler Shuck from the previous transfer cycle. And so, Louisville's set just pretty much at all of the offensive positions. In fact, most of their starting offense is going to be transfers. I don't know that Louisville is really as good as their record says from last year. Just being honest, Louisville did, going into the season, know that they had an easy schedule and were going to win some games. It's kind of how I feel about Syracuse this year, where they have a first-year head coach and they avoid all the tough teams in their conference, and so they should win, right away, like Louisville did last year. But I also know that at Purdue, Jeff Brom did win with less, and now he's actually got some really talented players on his team. Louisville could be a scary team. I've rated this a .5 because I still think highly of Clemson, and the game is being played in Clemson, so that has something to do with it. At Virginia Tech is next. I've got a lot of respect for what Brent Pry has done at Virginia Tech. Things were looking bad at the beginning of last year, I'm just going to be honest, and they turned it around, and they beat a good Tulane team quite handily in the bowl game. This is going to be Clemson's toughest road game. Even tougher than Florida State, I think. Just because I think Virginia Tech's atmosphere is that much tougher than Florida State's. And I do think Clemson might overlook the team. Well, we'll see what Virginia Tech's record is. Maybe that's not the case. Clemson could have a few losses by now. And so this is probably going to be an urgent game for them. Kyron Drones is a very good quarterback, and with Brent Pry's philosophy, they're going to run the ball down your throat and they're going to play good defense. I'd watch for this one, but I'm giving it a .5. At Pitt is next. Could be another scary game for Clemson. I don't know what happened to Pitt, man. At times last year, they just looked lifeless, and they were winning the previous couple of years. I don't know what happened. I think Clemson should take care of business in Pittsburgh. I guess it wouldn't shock me for this to be a close game or for Pitt to win the game, but I've rated this a .75. I don't really have a lot of notes on that. I don't have any notes for Citadel either. They're an FCS opponent. You should take care of them. That's a 1. South Carolina, I've also given a .75, just because I think a lot of the confidence in Shane Beamer as a coach is false confidence. I'm not quite sure that Shane Beamer is as good of a coach as people think that he is. South Carolina's roster is better than people think, and, offensively, I think they should be good. Defense, we'll see. I've given this game a .75, especially at home. Clemson should take care of business. South Carolina would struggle to make a bowl, I think, and this would be a tough game for them. So when you add up the games, when you add up the probabilities, the total is 8-4, which is kind of shocking to me. There's a lot of games against inferior opponents, but at the same time, there's also a lot of tricky games against teams that are getting better and improving and getting up to Clemson's level. Clemson, if it wants to be dominant in the ACC, you've got to dominate the, 0.5 games on your schedule. You've got to win most of those. Because the 0.75s are not going to be easier if you overlook them either. Offense has to be improved for Clemson. I think defense will be fine. I have no reason to doubt Clemson defensively because they haven't shown a drop-off there, even from losing Brent Venables. And so, Clemson really, I think 8-4 would be disappointing, but it seems the most likely, just given the teams that they have to play, and adding Georgia to your schedule did you no favors. So, that's it for me. If you want to see any specific teams done in this format, please let me know. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.